All right, finally, with that out of the way, let's get started. So this is the meeting for the cloud provider. So we're going to start with the pull request, and then we'll jump on to issues. Um, I think I just open up the links in the doc. So I'm guessing these are the filters that we typically use. Um, and then I'll sort by oldest just to make sure that there are no issues that have been languishing in our queue for a while. I think, let me filter it out by things that are not assigned. I know folks are taking a look. Function files. Okay, I think Jonathan approved this one. Looks like there was a rebase here. Okay. I think we have reviewers here, so I'm going to move past this. One is for a doc update, improve CS to Karpenter migration steps. I do think we discussed this in one of the previous meetings. Let me see if there's anything else that's pending here. Okay, I do think we need someone to help out with the review here. Any volunteers? Seems like the author has done a great job with the documentation here. We just need to make sure that things work as expected, and if these are the right things that we want to put in our documentation. It's a huge PR, but I'm guessing that's most likely because we have a bunch of different versions, so it's going to need to be updated across all of those.
Yeah, if the last comment on here doesn't say it, it might be worthwhile to like add a comment, that we're discussing it and we think it needs a review or something. I didn't see what that last comment looked like. The last comment was calling to see if Jonathan.
Yeah, I think Nick was probably taking a look.
Yeah.
And then I think since he moved on, I don't think we have had anyone take a look at this.
Yeah. So like I'll share like my practice, and I don't know if that, you know, just for the sake of sharing. Like, so when I'm doing a triage, a lot of times, especially on GitHub, if we're discussing an issue and we come to some understanding about it, I like to leave a message or leave a comment just so the next time we look at it, we remember, okay, we talked about it on February 24th. We think it needs more reviews. And then that gives us a good indication of like how stale these things become over time and whatnot. So not saying you need to do that, but just kind of sharing some of my techniques.
Yeah, yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, we definitely don't want to kind of keep going over these in every meeting now that we have these at a more regular cadence. I think there's a needs help label as well. Let me see if I can find this here. That's probably also a good option to just say that we need help with the review. This is probably the closest.
I think
So
the help wanted is the one.
yeah, I'm gonna put this in, and then yeah, I'll keep this open. I think I can add a comment after the meeting. On to the
Sounds
next
good.
one. I think this is the one that I have been taking a look, if I remember correctly. No, this is just auto assign. Okay, I think I confused this with something else. I see that we already added a help wanted tag here. So I'll just move on past this unless anyone wants to discuss. Yeah, I think what I'm gonna do is maybe just look at the help wanted labels after the meeting offline and see if there are things that we can just pick up, or maybe would be a good time to just drop a reminder on the Karpenter dev channel and the community Slack.
Yeah, I think the important thing is, as we're going through these, this is like an asynchronous conversation between all the community, basically. So yeah, like how do we have a meaningful kind of asynchronous conversation where we realize these things, we may not have volunteers, in this meeting specifically to look at them or do the reviews, but we want to keep we want to keep the conversation going, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I feel like now that we have started doing these more frequently, I mean, even if everyone, like not everyone is able to join these meetings, but just keeping some of this discussion going on in the Slack channel might just incentivize people to start taking a look.
Yeah, absolutely. Good idea.
All right, add ability to the Helm chart to specify init containers. See, seems like Jonathan has been taking a look at this. Okay. So I think we can move past this one. Okay. Looks like this has been actively reviewed. So it has taken a look at this as well. Seems like we are doing a reasonable job with the PRs now. You see most of these have been open for not too long. I just opened the same one again. GitHub should link to SIG Carpenter. Okay. It's rebase. I think if we're getting to the fairly new one, so I'm just gonna look at a few more and then we can jump on to the issues tab so that we spend some time over there. All right, I think we should be good for the PRs. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to issues? Okay. All right, let's start here. This is a feature request. Don't know if we have discussed this here, but we probably need someone to pick this up. I don't think this is gonna be a small change, but we'll have to come up with like a RFC and then the implementation. So please let me know. I mean, if this interests anyone, and I can just assign it to you, or else I think we'll just keep this as is. Do we do help wanted for these feature requests as well? because some of these don't seem like trivial. So I'm wondering what the threshold for the help wanted label is.
But that's a good question. I do not know.
Yeah, I think one thing that came up is we do want to ask for help, especially for newcomers. But then obviously, I mean, unless we really tag them with like a good first issue, then we don't want them to kind of start looking at things that are like fairly huge and then give up.
I guess you can still put help wanted, but you can choose who picks it up. So, like if it's a new person, say okay, maybe not, because how difficult this might be.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Though, yeah, the way I was thinking about this is if I mean, I don't know if there's a point to like using both the labels, like help wanted, and then for the things that we think are good first issue, then we also add the other label. But yeah, I mean, for now, I think it's a good point. We can start off with the help wanted thing here.
I think it's tough too with some of this feature work because you never know. You may not know how big the feature is going to be when you're speccing it out, and then if someone new comes along and like Garvin was saying, like maybe they're not able to, stay around for the whole feature, or it's bigger than they expected, or something. So yeah, it's a careful job, I guess.
Are you guys doing the sizes stuff? I thought the AWS repo has the sizes also, right? The t-shirt size or something.
Like in the labels.
I thought so. I
I mean,
could be wrong.
it'll do that on PRs when,
Oh,
it'll automatically detect like how many lines have changed or whatever, and it'll say this is a medium or a large or an X large or whatever. But
yeah. I wonder if it's worthwhile like calling this out. It's like, oh, it's a larger task and label it that way, so whoever wants to pick it up, they know coming in is gonna be more involved. But if it's not there, it's okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I can
plus
recommend.
one, we should definitely let people know if it's not going to be if it's going to be a big feature.
I mean, is this even something that can be supported by a non-AWS contributor? Because it deals with zonal outages and an understanding of how a cloud provider thinks about zonal outages.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good point.
sure. This is a bug. Yes, there has been a bit of a discussion here. I think this is a bit of a read, so let me take this offline. I'll try to go through this and see what's up. It seems like there was some good discussion here, but I'm not fully sure as to what's the next step. On to the next one. I think the requester is complaining about a node not draining when without a pending plot. There has been some recent activity here as well. So let me assign this to myself and I'm gonna take a look and see what's happening here. Yeah, I think they're asking about a node readiness metric, but we already should have the node telemetrics, but seems like someone is complaining we deprecated this. And I do remember reading about this in a different issue wherein someone was confused because I think we might have moved things around in the documentation a little bit. So I'm going to take a look at this. I'll assign it to myself, but I'm hoping this shouldn't be too bad. Just need to clarify what's happening here. And they're not consolidating to fit smaller instance. I think this has been pending for a while. Any volunteers for this? And for some of these older ones, one thing that I always wonder is maybe these are things that have been fixed with the new releases that we have. So I think part of it is just even validating if this is something that's still happening.
I mean, I feel like there should be a really simple end-to-end test that could like kind of bear this out or something.
Yeah. Okay, I think I might be able to take a look at this, but I'm gonna keep this at help wanted, and I'll assign it to myself if I get time. This one is interesting because I thought Karpenter optimizes for price, and that's kind of what I think the requester also wants. So
What I'm not sure is if they're asking for the one to n node splitting. They say fewest node strategy, but if they're asking, let's see. Yeah, for example, two C7XLs instead of one C7 2XL. So even if it makes more sense from a cost perspective, I believe we don't do this because at some point you're splitting and splitting and splitting and splitting. And I think there's more opportunity for churn to happen if you're splitting up your nodes and you don't have anything with headroom anymore. And then you're just going to effectively end up, I mean, I don't necessarily like the runaway train logical fallacy there, right? But you end up with like one pod per node on smalls.
yeah, I mean, I think just looking at this, part of what they're complaining about is that Karpenter optimizes on the EC2 price. So if we see that, having 5 nodes, for example, is gonna be cheaper than having one huge node, then Karpenter is gonna do that. But the problem is when they use some of these other services, like they charge by the number of nodes potentially. So that way, like the overall cost for them is still going to or potentially be higher. So I think that's basically what they're complaining about. Yeah, I don't know what everyone thinks. I mean, this seems like um, I mean, I don't know where we want to draw the line here, because these are not cloud provider specific solutions. I totally see the customer's pain point here because at the end of the day, it seems like they're not seeing or they're not realizing the full benefits. But wait, I think I missed a raise hand queue. Sorry. Go ahead. Elmika, do you want to start?
Yeah, like, first of all, like, I agree with what Reed is saying. I think this is, this is one of those things where it's like, it's a good problem from the user point of view, because yeah, like they might be paying per host or something like that for a service or per, and that makes a difference. But I wonder, is this really something that needs to be baked into the core of things, or is this something that like the node overlay feature could eventually solve? Because like if I were a user, right, and I could create a node overlay where I say every instance I make is going to have this additional cost on top of it, right? Then really, isn't that a user configuration issue where I should be in the future using the node overlay to say I have an overhead of X many, quatlus per host, and so that needs to be taken into account by Karpenter's calculation, because then I would think Karpenter would be able to accurately see if I make two of these nodes, there's going to be extra cost associated with each one of them. Whereas if I only make one of these big ones, it should work. So I would think this is kind of solved by node overlay in some ways, but I wanted to ask because I think you all know the feature much better than I do.
I was just gonna say, I think node overlay also currently, I think for like the quickest implementation, it was just a per node price adjustment. But I think there's opportunity for sure to include things like license fees. Like whether it's OS dependent, like I don't know if there's a license that's added on top of Windows nodes, for example, right? Like you could model that where there's just some additional fee, and I don't know how much you would want to, or like how you would necessarily model that. I don't know for sure, but I think node overlay does solve this for them.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, yeah, it seems like the kind of thing where it's like if you could have a generic node overlay that's like this is my license fee or whatever that gets applied to everything, then it should just feed into the calculations. But yeah, thanks, Reed.
Garvin, did you have any thoughts? I know your hand is up.
I had the same question, but then I guess I haven't looked at a map yet, but like Carpenter usually do consolidate n nodes into m where m is less than n, right? Like, or like two nodes into one node. I thought it does that normally.
Yeah, I think their point was they're thinking of if we had a 2XL and it was cheaper to have two single XLs. So we don't do node splitting, but we will do M to 1 or 0.
Right. Because they want fewer nodes, right? They're not splitting, they're going the other way. They want you to merge nodes, right?
Well, it seems they're getting caught in a situation where Carpenter thinks it's cheaper to make two nodes than to make one node. But when you take into account this outside data that Carpenter doesn't know about, it's actually more expensive to make two nodes than one node, right? And if Carpenter
Oh,
knew
okay,
that,
okay.
if Carpenter knew that, it probably wouldn't make the second node, right? It would figure out a way to make one node.
You are
Right,
right.
okay.
No, I initially thought this was about splitting nodes, not necessarily the cost per host, like overlay.
Right, okay.
Word.
That makes sense. Okay.
Right. It's just a matter of like, to me, this is why it seems like a user config thing, because it's just like, how could Carpenter ever know all these like extra fees that you might be adding?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think so one point that I missed, Reed, is the current scope of node overlay something that would solve this, or is this like an extension to node overlay?
I think this is an extension because I think there's just in scope now a specific um price adjustment, I believe, on the instance type, and then I don't remember if this is going to be kind of a global or a per node pool thing. I think that's part of the discussion still, and how those might interact. So if you have, for example, a node if you have an adjustment on a node pool that's overlaying some information on top of the nodes for that node pool, and then if you have, well, globally, I expect it to be this, how do they compete? What supersedes the other, etc. I think that's still part in the design that needs to kind of be figured out.
Got it. All right, I think like this was great discussion. I mean, I do think that if we can solve this, I mean, this is gonna help customers a lot because like there's a lot of other services that these customers use that obviously, Karpenter cannot account for. So like Almiko, you were saying if we just somehow expose this as a user config and then just let the customers define this, we get to stay agnostic of all these details while at the same time customers get the benefit. So I'm gonna link the node overlay, like the top level issue here later in the meeting. All right.
Sorry, I guess for the previous issue, do we want to remove need triage?
That's a good point.
Because in a way, we triaged it. Like it may come with no overlay. It may be sometime in the future, but like we kind of triaged it. I just don't want us to keep going back to things that we've looked over. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the way I was thinking about triage is that we don't yet know what form will be able to support this in, and like when that's gonna come. I I don't know if that's not like what triage typically covers. Miko, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, like that's, I was gonna kind of say, yeah, like if we were to think about this from a triage perspective, would you be willing to say this is accepted or declined right now, right? And we see there's like 12 thumbs up on here. So it seems like as a feature request, this is something that might want to be accepted, but it seems like a feature request we might want to tie with it might be dependent on the node overlay, and it might be more appropriate to take it back to the core repo rather than to handle it in the AWS provider repo, right? So I think, yeah, like I would almost agree with you. We should take needs triage off here and say, look, we're not going to accept this into the AWS provider repo, but we would like to consider this with node overlay in the core repo. And maybe we need to do some deduplication or whatever, or duplication in this case, and reopen it there. But that would be my opinion at least.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So if we remove the needs triage level, like, do we have to specify an accepted level? Like, does it have to be either or can we just keep this open as a feature request while we figure out what's the next step?
That's up to you guys, how like what you want the process to be. I think you can remove it and leave it a feature, or you can leave it with triage accepted as the end state, or you can be like triage rejected. Can you move it to core?
Right.
to-
Like I might remove needs triage just because we have triaged it, and then leave a good message like you did at the bottom, and don't close it here yet, right? But maybe say that we will close this once we have an issue on the core repo that replicates it, and we can put a pointer there. Because the whole point is like we want to have this discussion in the core repo because this feature would be applicable everywhere, right? Regardless of what cloud you're on, you might want to account for these things. So unfortunately, it's just we're kind of in bookkeeping mode here, right? We kind of have to point people in the right direction and do some of this manual issue creation and whatnot.
Thank you. I really appreciate kind of guiding me through because I'm not very used to this process, so still figuring out these things.
No, yeah, for sure. And I don't want to be too I'm trying not to be too overbearing here. I'm just trying to share what's kind of worked for me over the years, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, we're still trying to set this up, right? I mean, every meeting I come to, I find that we discuss this and kind of come up with new ways to move forward. So that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to become more important in the future. I have a feeling because right now we have a lot of users who are experiencing the AWS provider, right? There's a lot of activity around the AWS provider, and it's a really good piece of software, right? But as more users come to the Karpenter community, and I'm experiencing this from the cluster API perspective, we're going to have more and more users who want to participate in kind of the core functionality of Karpenter, and each provider becomes kind of a specific feature implementation then, right? And so at some level, like for the health of the greater project, we want to drive these cool ideas towards the core, but also give the providers the freedom to kind of fix the bugs they have and implement their own features and everything. So it's like a big machine with all sorts of gears, and stuff. So yeah, I appreciate what you're doing though, Saurav and Reed and Garvin and the rest here. It's been really good. And Jigisha too.
Right, so reading through this one. I don't know if everyone is done reading, but I have very limited knowledge about this particular piece. So does anyone have any thoughts? I'm not even fully clear as to what the requester is asking for here.
I'm not 100% sure if this is a good idea. So from what I've understood, Karpenter doesn't look at this specific constraint as a kube scheduler config. And what it's doing is telling pods to respect these constraints by default when scheduling. And Karpenter doesn't respect it. It doesn't actually look at the kube scheduler config. It only look at the topology constraints from the pod spec itself. And from what I've discussed previously with the group, I think like it seems reluctant to take in this and simply rely on the pod spec simply because I don't fully remember. I think there's some differences in like the two that there's meaningful. There's like I guess in a way, scheduling is not the same as provisioning a node. So there may be differences in features in like what scheduling is doing versus what the pod actually needs. That's why it usually ignores these constraints. I don't know if it's okay to bring it back in. It's been a while since I looked at this, but that's what I remember. It's that this is the default from the scheduler, and Karpenter usually do not look at the scheduler's configurations.
Got it. No, thanks for that context. I think it does seem like the requester is basically saying that Karpenter should continue to do what it's doing, but it should still have a fallback to these default constraints. And I don't know what that theory really means in terms of the impact to Karpenter, but is that something that we think might be a good idea?
So in our current configuration, due to the limitation of how Karpenter interprets preferences, meaning Karpenter tightens all preferred into strict when creating nodes. So for example, like if I say prefer topology host name, it will constrict that into require host name. So if there's n pods, it'll create n nodes if they have that preference. The way we get around this right now is setting the scheduler preference to that and remove the preference from Karpenter from the pod specs that Karpenter doesn't do n nodes for certain things because that blows up some of our costs at times. Taking this in would changes that. I'm not sure if that's a good or bad thing, but likely needs a little bit more thought behind it before we say, yeah, we'll take this in or not.
Doesn't this kind of get a I think I'm not the most familiar on the provisioning side. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but doesn't this kind of get away from the Carpenter's not scheduling pods? Like Carpenter is just respecting whatever Cube Scheduler is attempting to do and then making compute for it. And I feel like having Carpenter make these decisions, I don't know. It sounds like it's better for this to stay in the deployment spec.
I think that's our original argument too, is like getting out of the schedule because Carpenter doesn't actually fully match the scheduler's behavior, especially with the timing of the preferences. So it may continue to not make sense to understand what the scheduler is seeing. But I think it might need a little bit more discussion because I don't know if the answer is yes or no.
Okay. I think, just adding a note here. I'm guessing, I don't know what's a better label here. Is there like investigation? Maybe needs investigation is a good option to put here.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna remove the needs triage. All right. I think, one. Just calling to see what's the latest here. It doesn't look like there has been a lot of update. In my understanding, though, isn't Kubelet the one that removed these annotations, or am I misremembering? Does anyone remember?
Should be the cloud provider controller.
Oh, the cloud. Oh yeah, that's true. I think so. I mean, Karpenter is not the one that should be removing this, right?
The only concern here is if there's a race condition on Carpenter applying the taints and the taints being removed. But beyond that, yes, agreed that usually Carpenter's not the one that removes this or handles this, but I don't know if there's a race condition or something happening here.
That's fair. I think a long time ago, one of the issues that I looked at was basically CCM removing these stains, but then one of the other systems just not doing a correct write after read, so they would put back these stains. It was a long time ago, but definitely kind of makes sense that something like this could be happening. Like I think I'm gonna put the needs investigation thing here.
So in general, I would not expect Carpenter to be the one removing this taint. This taint is supposed to be removed by the cloud controller manager. So if it's the case that EKS does not run with a cloud controller manager, then you would want Carpenter AWS in an EKS environment to remove it, right? But the problem, right, if that taint is on the node, it means that someone has started the kubelet to think it's in external CCM mode, right? So if it's the case that you're not running the CCM and this taint is appearing on your nodes, then your kubelets are misconfigured, right? You need to change them to not be using the cloud provider, the external cloud provider configuration, right? So the other problem is you don't want Carpenter removing this taint because when you remove this taint, the node is considered initialized and it should have certain information on it, like the IP addresses need to be initialized. And if the infrastructure provides like an instance ID or a provider ID, that needs to be initialized on the node too. So if Karpenter prematurely removes the uninitialized taint, it might prevent the CCM from properly initializing it. And some of this might have been captured in here. But I would look at the way your Kubernetes is configured and make sure that you're expecting to run in the external CCM mode, and then further, if the CCM is not running, you need to run it. And if it is running, then maybe it's having a problem initializing the nodes. So I wouldn't expect this to be a Karpenter problem. I would expect this to be a problem with, the cloud controllers. And I really wouldn't want Karpenter to be removing those taints. I mean, I would say Karpenter shouldn't really be removing this annotation unless, you're not expecting to run a CCM or something, right? Like there's a misconfiguration happening somewhere here.
Yeah. I think just from a division of responsibility point of view, I don't think Karpenter should be in the business of determining if a node is ready, right? So because it's not just about marking it as ready, right? Like then it would need to take on more responsibilities than it currently does.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Okay, right. I added some notes and move this to needs investigation. I'm gonna actually keep this open and see if I can take a look. Seems like there are a bunch of thumbs up here. I do remember that there were some issues that customers were running into when upgrading to Karpenter 1.0. Jigisha, Reed, or any of you guys, do you remember if this is like one of those popular upgrade issues?
I think this could be one of the issues, but we need more information to validate that.
So this looks like is that something from the validating webhook then? Because if it is, I think using Argo, there's that issue where there was like the owner ref blocking deletion of resources thing, but that Jonathan fixed. But even with fixing that, when using Argo, there's manual and auto options, I believe, for when you run something through a pipeline, for pruning resources. And if you don't have your pruning set to true, then you'll just leave things. And if you leave things and like it's still there, then you could run into this problem. I think.
It makes sense. I mean, like Jigisha said, most likely we might need more information from the requester here, but I do think like this seems like a similar class of issue that we have seen with people using Argo and then upgrading to 1.0. Only add like a wanted thing. I don't know if y'all had a chance to read this, but I think this is kind of similar to what we discussed a few issues back, but this is a little more explicit. I think the question here is basically, do we want Karpenter to support these custom schedulers? I mean, technically, it doesn't even interact with the scheduler directly, so I don't even know how this is going to work out. But what does everyone think? What they're complaining about is when Karpenter makes a scheduling decision, and they have a custom scheduler, which is basically preventing that pod from scheduling on a given node. And like Karpenter just doesn't do anything else to successfully schedule that pod.
This sounds like node overlay. Just gonna throw it over there. There's like some resource they're like stopping on or limiting the pods on. Because yeah, there's like nothing we can do here, right? Without somehow hinting at Carpenter's like you ran out of something, and that something is extended resources or whatever it might be, or pods.
Is like again, maybe I should go and brush up on node overlay, but do you mind just quickly explaining how node overlay would solve this problem?
Yeah, I guess from what I've understood of an overlay, at least in initial like conception of it, it's like being able to modify or add certain resources onto the node based on like okay, this is where I'm not completely sure. Like initially it was like by instance type and no pool, but that might change. But here, like if there is some other thing, so I don't know what they're like. I haven't read through the whole thing. I don't know if there's some other thing they're like schedulers watching that's counting down on.
Yeah. So
If that
go ahead.
counter is being drained, you can technically maybe add that into the extended resources for Carpenter. Actually, maybe that is not true. Maybe they're just filtering differently.
Yeah, I think this one is the most relevant part probably.
Maybe it won't do it or overlay because it's more complicated.
Yeah, what's not clear to me is
I don't know what's it doing.
how this custom scheduler is filtering out nodes. Because it seems to me that if the custom scheduler is not returning pods to some state that is schedulable to all nodes, then this is like I'm trying to figure out how Carpenter is supposed to figure out the new rules of any given custom scheduler.
Yeah, exactly. That's my worry because whatever the scheduler is doing, it happens after Carpenter has made its decision, right? So even if like Carpenter were to consider the scheduler's decision-making process, like there had to be a feedback loop first, wherein Carpenter would first have to know that, okay, this scheduler is not going to schedule this pod on the node that I think it should schedule on, which kind of goes against that boundary that we have today, wherein Carpenter just does not guarantee that a pod is going to schedule on a node, right? So is this something like what's our take? In some sense, it seems like we would be crossing that boundary. But like, do we need more information? Do we need more research, or is this like a clear case of, hey, you know what, we can't support this today in Carpenter?
Again, just like if they're saying that pods should schedule on that node claim in that node, and then the custom scheduler is failing to do it, I don't think that's necessarily a Carpenter problem.
Well, they're not directly saying that. What, like, if you look at the expected behavior thing here, they're basically saying that Carpenter should spin up a node for a pod if it is marked unschedulable by any scheduler.
Do you know how cluster autoscaler do this? I didn't think cluster autoscaler has any idea about custom scheduling either.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. I don't think it would support this today.
It may not be a Carpenter prompt, but like it seems like at least from my mind, there's always been a discrepancy between scheduling a pod and we need nodes for like what a pod needs for a node and where to put the pod in. And it seems like we collapse all those into scheduler like the schedule config, even though and both the scaler and the scheduler use the same thing, even though sometimes we want something different. I don't know if this is a continue like manifestation of like this. Like I want it to do this thing, but schedule slightly different. But in this case, it's like doing both. I don't know how to answer this. I don't think it makes sense for it to know about scheduler, but it needs some way to hint at Karpenter to be like there are other additional conditions that you should consider. I just don't know what that form would look like.
Yeah, makes sense. I think not, just thinking about it, one thing that I'm wondering is like just looking at the outcome that the requester wants here. In some sense, like they don't really care if Karpenter considers the scheduler, but it could also be thought of as a problem wherein Karpenter should, give another shot to scheduling if it tries to schedule a pod and if it sees that the pod is just not getting scheduled. So maybe just like spin up another node.
I'm not 100% sure I buy that. That could be problematic if it's just like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just gonna create more nodes. Yeah, I don't know the answer, but yes, it's kind of funky.
Yeah, it looks like Nick kind of said the same thing earlier too, right? Just figuring out ways to provide custom scheduling plugins.
All right, I think I can move this to needs investigation and oops. All right, I think we are right on time, so I'll stop here. We have like a minute, so does anyone have any questions or anything else they want to bring up? Sorry, I should have asked this a little earlier. Cool. All right then. Think this was a great discussion and we'll see you all next time. Okay, bye.